Hello, everybody. How are we doing this evening, or good morning for the Aussies? It's my goats. I'm just going to say hello to a few people first. I see the plot hole in the chat. Hello, plot hole. I see Chris Durham. Chris Durham is basically like my coach. He's always driving me forward, being like, "When's the next video? When's the next video?" Basic trig. And I see Taddy Bogle in the chat. Hello, Taddy. Who else have we got? We have PhD Tony, Christopher Shapley, DVM CVA, everybody's favorite American veterinarian. And yes, I am getting better at saying that. Who else have we got? Critical Cripple. Hello, Dave. How are you? Yeah, so Commander Darklight is there. Fohammer, of course, ready to party. Always ready to party. My little stalker. How's everybody doing tonight? It's a weird time for me to go live because it's 11 o'clock. So pretty much had to kick half my family out of the room. But they're awesome. They're very understanding. Hello, Irish DC95. How are you? And we have JL Warren as well. Yeah, so this, like last week I did the serious discussion on what happened in the US Capitol. This week, I wasn't going to go live until obviously Sunday. Sunday, by the way, I will be live with the second episode, if you can call it an episode, and the second live stream of Life on the Flip Side. It will be on Steam and Cup of Reason's channel. So Steam and Cup of Reason, if you're not subscribed to him, please do, because it's going to be fun. We're going to be talking about tourists and stuff. Yeah, so get your stories ready for that one. But today, I kind of wanted to go live. I've been planning this for the last couple of days. It's a weight that I really, really feel needs to be lifted, and I don't see it being lifted anytime soon. Yes, it's a serious discussion, Taddy. You may stay, because you have to be here, because you're awesome. But yeah, today, the last couple of days, we've seen the release of a report that should have been released 6 years ago. And that was the report into the mother and baby homes scandal. If you're not familiar with it, I am going to be going through a little bit of a timeline, explaining what was in the report today, and I will have the report if any of you want to follow along. I'll bring it up on the screen here. I also have a link to it if you want to read the executive summary. But effectively, it was 3,000 pages long. I've read most of it. It's very hard to read. Not only because it contains some harrowing stories of survivors of mother and baby homes. If you're not familiar with the term, I will be going through it. But also because it feels like it's kind of written like a 12-year-old at times. The language in it is quite bad. And the conclusions, to say they're bland, it is an understatement. Hello, Math Pig. Hope you're well. Hope the daughter as well. So yeah, I'm going to be taking people through, one, why the mother and baby homes and the Magdalen laundries were so prominent in Ireland and what happened with them. And two, a little bit of the report that was released over the last week. And yes, I have a cup of tea because I'm gonna need Irish tea for this. Where's my whiskey? Taddy has the whiskey, but yeah, this is my warning, Fred. This is my warning. This is a very sensitive topic. Mathbig, if you look in your Discord, I've sent you the link if you want to come on and discuss this. Oh, hello. Who else is in the chat? Elman is in the chat. Mario Rui is in the chat. Hello, people. Mike Hall, how are you doing? So, yes, Taddy, you stole the whiskey. Hard to never again says hard to read. I'm sure even more difficult to write these reports. They are, and it's always hard to read or to hear someone's story and then try to make unbiased recommendations of those harrowing stories, because what do you do with stories that would literally break your heart? It's not an easy one. But we'll go through a little bit of it today and kind of understand why everyone is pissed off at it. The survivors are pissed off at it. Politicians are pissed off with it. Journalists are pissed off with it, because essentially, in effect, it basically says women in these homes, children in these homes faced basically torture. It was torture. But we're all to blame, so let's not do anything. That's essentially what the recommendations were. I think there was like 35 recommendations, and all of them was, well, time to move on. It's very easy to say time to move on when you're not living with the consequences. And not only did they say it's time to move on, they also kind of suggested that it was justified for the government to pass emergency legislation trying to seal records for 30 years, meaning that most of the survivors would not be entitled to get their full history, which to me just seems absolutely batshit crazy and heartbreaking. So I'll go through a little bit of the timeline so people understand what the mother and baby homes were, why they were so prominent, and why it's important that this report came out, but why it's also important to challenge the report, so that the conversation can go forward. So for those of you not up on Irish history, other than the Irish Revolution, which happened between 1916 and, well, that was the Rising. So it started in 1916, didn't end until 1925 after the War of Independence and the Civil War. So I do have a little bit of a history, if I can find it now. Will I go through that? Yeah, I'm going to focus solely on the mother and baby homes and the Magdalen laundries. A lot of people would have seen the Magdalen sisters, or would have seen Philomena, or a few other of the movies that's been made, like Song for a Raggy Boy and stuff like that. But the foundation of the Irish state did collide with being Irish equals being Catholic. And so when the Irish Revolution happened, we okay, yeah, I'll be going in 30 or 40 minutes still, definitely. So when we gained independence from Britain, we were a poor nation. We basically gave over all of healthcare and all of education and pretty much all of our moral authority to the Catholic Church, particularly in the 1930s. We had a series, let me see if I can find it. In 1935, we had a series of laws and acts come in. So in 1935, especially, we had a ban on contraception, We had the marriage bar for women who are married, not working. We had the Public Dance Hall Acts, which basically tried to curb how can I put this? The Dance Hall Act. It was basically for licensed dances to hook people up, essentially. And they were oversaw by predominantly priests. So you would have to basically ask a priest to set you up with someone in these dance halls. It was ridiculous. It was absolutely ridiculous. So that was in 1935. That wasn't repealed. Actually, that hasn't been repealed. It's been amended, but it's still on the statute books, weirdly enough. Yes, ban frivolity. The idea was that if people were left to their own devices and they weren't micromanaged and watched and supervised, then they would do anything. And yeah. Yeah, Benghazi. That's exactly, yeah. So the ban on contraception didn't end until 1979. The contraception train in 71 was where Irish women would go up to Northern Ireland, get contraceptives and bring them back. So essentially, in a way, there was a mini war on women. 1936 saw a reissuing, 1936, 1937 saw a reissuing a new constitution by Eamon de Valera's Fianna Fáil government, and most of which was co-authored by the Catholic Church, by the then Archbishop for Dublin. So he basically helped write our constitution, or rewrite our constitution, which tried to enshrine Catholicism in the heart of our constitution. So we're still living with the effects of that. So 1979, then we saw the contraception being available with prescription, but up until early 1990s, you still needed a letter from your doctor and a letter from your husband if you were female, or a priest. Depending on where you were, you'd still need, even if you were a couple going for contraception, you'd still need a letter from the priest. Homosexuality was banned until 1990. Divorce was banned until 1997. Plot holes is a bad. The only reason I know why. The only reason why I know the start of the Irish Revolution is because the Cranberries. The Cranberries were a great band, I have to say. So yeah, that's kind of a little bit of the way it was, as such. That kind of started to break. So the report that we've seen issued in the last week centered around the mother and baby homes specifically. And it came because a woman called Catherine Corliss, who is a local Galway historian, started looking into the home that used to be there. So Tuam Mother and Baby Home was founded by Galway County Council. So this is run by the Irish government. So the idea that the Irish government didn't know that this was happening is ridiculous. These were actually run. They were founded and funded by the councils, run by the Catholic Church, by different orders of the Catholic Church. So Bon Secure ran the Tuam home. In 1961, Tuam closed because it was dilapidated. The residents of the home, and that stemmed from unwed mothers to disabled people, disabled children to just destitute. They were imprisoned there, basically. They were, quote unquote, transferred to other institutions. Then in 1972, the Tuam home was absolutely demolished, and it was built over by a housing estate. So Galway County Council steamrolled the building, steamrolled the whole place, and put up a very, very swank, very nice social housing. And when I say swank, I mean the basic of the basics. The Then in 1975, two boys found skeletal remains. Now, at the time, they believed it was from the famine era because nobody really remembered much about the Tuam home. They just knew it was an estate. They knew it was a barracks at one stage, but they didn't really, the new generation didn't really think about the mother and baby home. So they thought it was a famine era skeleton. And what they did was the priest basically buried them, shrine was erected, and blessed with holy water and crap like that. So this basically remained dormant until 2012 when Catherine Corliss published the article called The Home. She acknowledged the high infant mortality rate in the Tuam. And you have to remember, the mother and baby homes were not like the Magdalen laundries. There is a separation there. Yes, women who were unmarried went there, but the important thing to remember with the mother and baby homes was over from, let's say, the 1950s, the clientele moved from women who were destitute, who were thrown out by their families or who didn't have families or whatever, to wealthier women, or women from good households, or who had gotten into trouble by a wealthy man who would pay to put her in there. So that's the difference. A lot of the women who went into the mother and baby homes did go voluntarily, mainly because they were terrified of what other people might say. Stigma towards unwed mothers at the time was absolutely horrendous. You were ostracized from the community. This is in the 50s, 60s. Hello, Sable Eagle. How are you? Jefferson, how's it going, man? So you were ostracized from the community. They didn't want to know you. You were fucked out of it. That was it. End of story. And so women went to great lengths to either have their babies in secret and give them up, because that was the societal pressure. So in a way, yes, to some extent, the report is right. Society does have a hand in this tragedy. But there is another element to it. A lot of women went to Britain. And again, they talk about this in the report, which I'll go through now in a minute. A lot of women went to Britain. And what was happening was the Catholic Church in Britain were liaising with the Catholic Church in Ireland to put pressure on Britain to repatriate Irish women. And they did that by basically kicking them out of congregations and again, upping the stigma on lone parents. So in 2014, then an article went live calling for a plaque for all of the infant names, because Tuam was run by the council, everyone had to be documented. Every death, every birth, every illness, it had to be documented. And it was. The issue was for the 800th, nearly 800 children who died in Tuam. This is particular in Tuam. There was only 2 burial records. Only 2. So what happened to the other 798? And this is where the Irish Mail on Sunday kind of suggests a secret mass grave. So this is 2014. The commission is set up. There's more pressure coming on the government, especially after the Magdalen report in 2013, where we saw the then Taoiseach or Prime Minister Enda Kenny launch a big apology, which was astounding, to be honest. Set up the commission in 2014. The terms of reference were announced in 2015. And yeah, the excavation didn't happen until 2016, 2017. And at the time, I'm just thinking, At the time, the Bon Secure nuns who ran Tuam had a spokesperson say, "Not a single bone will be found." Now, think about that for a second. These nuns, who were put in charge of the most vulnerable people in the country, came out with a statement, said, "We didn't do anything. You're not going to find anything. There won't." The direct quote was, "Not a single bone will be found." Now, that said, 1975, children found 2 sets of bones. Little boys found 2 sets of bones. So the idea that not a single bone, they were already found. So when they did the actual excavation, they found, I think it was 792 skeletal remains of children between birth and 3 years old. Get your head around that for a minute. That's absolutely insane. Why the hell that was allowed to happen? Absolutely insane. Yeah, they said it knowing that the backyard was full of corpses, of course. But you see, here's the problem. The backyard wasn't full of corpses. What they had done was they had a septic tank. Now, anyone that doesn't know what a septic tank is, it's basically where you put all your waste, your excrement. So in the septic tank, there was a hidden chamber. There was another chamber. And it was in this chamber where the remains were found. So not only were they not buried, but they were stored in such an inhumane way. And I think that's, if it was in a mass grave, that would have been one thing. But they put them in with the wastewater, a septic tank, and everyone had this vision of just the barbarity of it. So following that, there was 900 found in a mass grave in Cork. Yeah, Math Big, your mum still runs on a septic tank. When I was down in West Cork, I ran off the septic tank. We had a septic tank. So trying to get through this, it's hard. 900 were found in a mass grave in Bessborough in Cork. And then to top it all off, to add insult to injury, as I said, in October 2020, the government rushed through emergency legislation basically sealing certain records in an archive for 30 years. Now, the reason why this was made public this week was because survivors were demanding access. The report came back. The survivors obviously wanted access. And so they gave access. But 2 days, get this, lads, 2 days before allowing access to this 3,000-page report, they gave it, someone in the government, quote unquote, leaked the document to the press. Now, I can be very cynical. To me, when you know you're having this Zoom call with or whatever it was, you were having a meeting, a webinar with the survivors to go through the document. So before they even got the document, the government were saying, "Come to this webinar. We'll explain what it's about, what the findings are, their own take, basically. Then you'll get the report. You've already gotten the report from what I know or what I believe, which they didn't. But for me, they didn't trust the survivors. They didn't trust the survivors. He Shield, I will go over it now in a second. They didn't trust the survivors with the knowledge that they wouldn't leak the awful truth of what was in the document. So someone in the department did, so that they could control the narrative. And what was remarkable was, as it was being leaked, the Taoiseach, the Prime Minister, he was already all set with his thing, with his press release to say, I'm going to apologise in the Dáil chamber, in the Parliament tomorrow. So it's all fine, all well and good. We're going to have healing, blah, 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 blah. Now, so he knew, in my view, he knew that this document was about to be leaked, because he wouldn't have had a statement ready to go in time for printing. The timing doesn't add up from what the journalists have said, and the timing of his statement doesn't add up. So they didn't trust the survivors. Just to go, it's fine. Just to go over it, we're talking about the. I was just giving a brief history of the mother and baby homes, particularly what led to this report coming out. We're going to go through a bit of the report today. A lot of it is bullshit. A lot of it is just documenting how many children died, etc., etc., or the conditions, or how. It's okay, Cider and Port. It's good to see you, Stephen. Hope you're doing all right. So yeah, I was just giving a timeline for how this report came into being, and the fact that in the last couple of days it was released to the press. The government already knew it was going to be released. They already had a statement ready saying the Taoiseach is going to, or the Prime Minister is going to make a statement and apologise. The reason why this doesn't sit well with most of Irish society is because the following 2 days, he was asked specifically by the survivors to give them more time to read the document. Again, it's a 3,000-page document. I've gone through most of it. Most of it is testimony, or most of it is detailing the differences in procedures and organizational bits from the different homes. So for this, Tusk, I will bring you in a few minutes because I do want to get your take on it. But let's go to the report. So here's the report. I know it's a bit yeesh. But there are some things that we can learn from it. So first of all, there was 56,000 unmarried mothers, 57,000 children that was investigated. Further 25,000 women were not, and even more larger amounts of children were not investigated. That's an important figure. 25,000. Why didn't they? If they were going to do this investigation, why didn't they investigate the entire thing? So I'm just going to go through this very, very quickly and explain a few things that are important to note. So the women aged from 12 years old to 40, 80% of whom were between 18 and 29, 11.4% were 18 or younger. Now, this is not just in the Tuam home, this is throughout the entire thing. Let me see. Yeah, so 60s, 70s, 80s, under 18s rose sharply. To the extent that in Dunboyne, 23.4% of all of the admissions into these homes were girls under the age of 18. Hey Bacon Earth, good to see you. And again, they're just explaining that there were multiple reasons for women being resident in these homes, but the majority of them were pregnant while unmarried. Um, this one here, number 5, is a very interesting one. And this is what got me throughout the whole document. I'm not going to go through the whole document tonight because, gah. But number 5 there, women were admitted to mother and baby homes and county homes because they failed to secure the support of their family and the father of their child. They failed. So already you're getting this victim blaming language. Now this goes on throughout the entire report, and this is only the summary, by the way. It goes on throughout the entire report, where it's the women at fault. They failed to secure the support of their family. There are many reasons why women became pregnant, unwed. Not their fault. Definitely not always their fault. But the whole point of it was already you're seeing the start of it's their fault. It's the woman's fault. Ireland appears to be the only country where a large number of unmarried pregnant women left the country. Well, that's because there was nowhere to rent. Nowhere would give a home to an unmarried pregnant woman. So their only option was to either go into a Magdalen laundry, go into a mother and baby home if they could afford it, or leave the country. But again, forgiving that statement or trying to downplay that statement, it must be acknowledged that many of their fellow citizens also emigrated. So again, they're kind of downplaying the importance of this. I found this interesting. Section 8 there, where it's highlighted. I don't know if you can see this. Hang on. Now, there is no evidence that women were forced to enter mother and baby homes by the church or the state. That is a very, very damning phrase. The reason why it's damning is if I go ahead to 45. Hold on. So 45. Many pregnant women fled to Britain to protect the secrecy, only to face the prospect of being returned to Ireland against their wishes. British Catholic charities put considerable pressure on Irish hierarchy and on government to repatriate the women. So in one breath, they're saying, there's no proof, there's no evidence that these women were forced into these homes by the church or by the government. A few paragraphs later, there you go. There's the proof. They've just set it out. There were charities, there were organizations, there were Irish government repatriating women and forcing them into these homes. Mistreatment of women described as PFIs, pregnant from Ireland. And they were ostracized from the communities. So again, they were forced back into... There was one account, and I will bring this up. There was one account that a woman went to the UK and stayed with her aunt. And her aunt let it slip to someone, or it went to, I think it was a family friend. She was staying with a family friend. She was pregnant. The friend let it slip to her aunt, who let it slip to her mother. And within a week, the Irish nuns were banging down the door to take her home. And she spent the next 6.5 years in Bessborough. 6.5 years. And after 3 years, her child was taken off her at the last minute and sold to an American family. She never saw her child again. So these were real experiences. So on the one hand, this is what I have an issue with the report, because it's this back and forth speaking. It's like, you can't blame the authorities, but the authorities did this. women faced being brought back to Ireland. Women faced incarceration. Women faced the laundries. Women faced mother and baby homes. And more than that is they faced their children being taken away from them, literally at the drop of a hat. That was the issue. There's another, trying to actually explain this now. There's another experience where a woman was so mistreated during her pregnancy that during her labor, the nun, the Bon Secure nun, sat on her chest so that she would push without going forward, without moving. She sat on that woman's chest, crushing her as she delivered that baby. So it stings when you're reading something that has listened to these incredible stories of survival, absolute brutal oppression, and then turns around and says, well, you can't blame them. The women failed to secure this proper supports. That it's hard to hear that kind of thing. Going back up then, sorry. They go through basically how the mother and baby homes weren't as bad as the county homes, which again were mainly owned by or controlled by the county councils. Again, the idea that they didn't know that this was happening, absolutely ridiculous. And so you see an attempt to forgive the authorities. Let's brush it under the carpet. Let's pretend it didn't happen. And unfortunately, Ireland in particular, we've had enough of that. I want to explain to you why Ireland has had enough of that. If I can find my notes. So yeah, as I said, at the beginning of our little nation, the Catholic Church took over pretty much everything. They had full disclosure of schools, hospitals, etc., the whole lot. In the 1990s, when we joined, well, in the 80s, we joined the EEC, which is now the EU. And with that came obligations to hold certain human rights standards. So the last Magdalen Laundry closed its doors in 1996. 1996. The last mother and baby home closed its doors in 1997. This is not distant past for us. This is within my lifetime. I was not yet 10, but I was the right side of 10. And it's amazing that we're looking at these issues as if they're way away in the past and we just need to forget. Actually, it's amazing. Someone, Ivy Gentry says, unfortunately, if we don't get sorted out here in the US, that's where some states are heading. The discussion that's happening in Ireland at the moment is very much the same discussion that's being discussed in the US. This idea of let's forgive and forget and move on and unite. as if it's that simple. You can't unite until you've acknowledged the real problem, and worked towards steps in having real ramifications, real consequences for those who inflicted horror. And until that time, you can't have healing. No amount of, oops, I'm sorry about that, is going to help. So for us, we started breaking with the Catholic Church in and around the 1990s. We had homosexuality that was decriminalized in 1990, 1991. We had, right through the 90s, we heard survivors of abuse come forward, leading to 1999, an apology from the then Prime Minister Bertie Ahern after the report on industrial schools, particularly the Christian Brothers, who were absolutely horrendous. Their treatment towards the children in their care was horrific. It was absolutely horrific. And so there was a repatriation scheme set up. Survivors were compensated, a compensation scheme set up. And so there was an apology from Bertie Ahern. And here starts the apologies, the apology season. So I'm going to give another quick timeline. 1999, we had the apology after the report on industrial schools. 2005, we had the Ferns report. 2009, we had both the Murphy. So the Ferns report looked at sexual abuse in a particular diocese in Wexford, as far as I was aware. Then we had, in 2009, the Ryan report and the Murphy report. If I can, actually, I don't know if my stream is strong enough for it. I just want to see if I can, yeah. So I want to play this, and this is going to be quite hard to hear, but I think it's important because it sets the tone. So all along in Ireland, you could not, you could never go, and much like America, you could never talk bad about the Catholic Church. You could never disobey the Catholic Church. And this was starting to break in the 90s when we started gaining access to the EU and how other people and how other societies lived. So I'm going to share this. If I can find it. There we go. Share the audio. So, trigger warning. This is probably going to be hard to hear.
Mr. Chairman, I'm surprised at Minister there now. First of all, Mr. Minister, you made a bags of it in the beginning by changing the judges. You made a complete bags of it at that time, because I went to the Lafay Commission and you had 7 barristers there questioning me and telling me I was telling lies when I told them that I got raped of a Saturday, got a merciful beating after it, and then he came along the following morning and put Holy Communion in my mouth. You don't know what happened there. You haven't the foggies, you're talking through your hat there, and you're talking to a Fianna Fáil man, a former councillor, a former mayor. You're talking, what tooth nail for the party that you're talking about now. You didn't do it right. You got it wrong. Admit it, and apologise for doing that, because you don't know what I feel inside me. You don't know the hurt I had. You said it was non-adversarial. My God. 7 barristers throwing questions at us, non-stop. I attempted to commit suicide. There's the woman who saved me from committing suicide on my way down from Dublin after spending 5 days at the Commission. 5 days I spent at the Commission. They brought a man over from Rome, 90-odd years of age, to tell me I was telling lies, that I wasn't beaten for an hour, non-stop, by 2 of them. By 2 of them, non-stop, from head to toe without a shred of cloth on my body. My God, Minister. And then could I speak to you and ask your leader, would you stop me?
Yep. So yeah, I wanted to show that because this was the first real time that Irish voices The survivors said, actually, I am going to speak out. I am going to talk. I am going to be visible. I'm not allowing anyone else to tell my story anymore. This was on national television. So that was after the Ryan report. And that was Brian Lenihan at the time, basically saying that, the report didn't find any conclusions of criminal action, and all this garbage. So he was rightly challenged by a survivor, who, by the way, was a previous leading member of that same party in a local sense. So you had the Ryan report, you had the Murphy report, again looking at sexual clerical abuse in industrial schools. You had the Cloyne report looking at physical abuse in these schools, particularly in the Cloyne parish. Much like Boston, much like other areas of the US where you had clerical abuse. So now we're getting serious. Now we're actually hearing from survivors. For the first time, people in Irish society who had held all of this in for so long were starting to come out. In 2013, we had the Magdalene report. And again, I do want to show this if I can. Actually, no, I won't. The Magdalene report saw the Den Taoiseach and the Kenny make a historic apology and redress scheme for the survivors. Came to nothing, mostly ceremonial, mostly bullshit, but it was important to see. Ivy Gentry, this, yeah, that's why I'm pagan. My half sister is pagan, actually. But yeah, so again, this is hard to talk about. It's hard to look at, but this is the truth. The Ryan report in particular was the first time the survivors came out en masse, in force, on the TV and told their stories directly. They weren't hiding it anymore. And that is remarkable. For Irish society, that is remarkable. So during the Magdalene report and that whole process, that's when the Mother and Baby Home said, well, if you're going to recognize their suffering and you're going to call it for what it is and you're going to call it abuse and you're going to call it forced interment, what about us? We faced similar things. We had our babies ripped from our arms in the hospitals. What's worse, by the way, a few years ago, the Bon Secours, I've spoken about the Bon Secours nuns, who are vicious, absolutely fucking vicious. The Bon Secours, you're going to love this. The Irish government, a few years ago, were talking about a national maternity hospital. 5 guesses who you think they were going to give that contract to. Yeah, they were going to give it to the Bon Secours nuns. Just get your head around that. They were actually after. This is in the midst of the discussions over the Mother and Baby Homes, repeal the 8th Amendment, which was the abortion ban, the marriage equality referendum. All of these social movements were in the process of happening. And the government was like, yeah, brilliant, okay, but we're going to give the maternity hospital back to the nuns. It was one of those facepalm moments that is so rare. Fred Bailey, you are good at this. You're brilliant. So yeah. Tusk, Mathpig, if you are still around, if you want to come in and have a chat, by all means, absolutely, because I've been going for nearly an hour now and people are probably sick of hearing my voice. But I did want to come on and I did want to explain it. So essentially, the report is piss. So hello, Tusk. I wanted to get your take on the whole situation because I know your family have experience with something similar.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay. This is going to be the first time I've spoken about a lot of this. So it may be a little difficult for me.
Yeah, take your time, man. Take your time. And if at any point you don't feel like you can continue, just say, okay, let's move on.
Okay.
But
Right. Yeah, okay, thanks. I'll see how far I can get. Right. My grandmother fell pregnant. We're from Donegal. Well, there may be a few terms just for the people in chat that don't translate well to English, but I'll do what I can there. We were anlusher, or travelling folk, tinkers, pikeys is what the English called us, which is not a word we like to hear.
mm-hmm.
And no one gave a crap if we lived or died. You know, my grandmother fell pregnant. She was only a girl, maybe 14 years old the first time, and the baby was taken from her. She had no choice. That was that. Catholic Church came took it. No argument. About a year or so later, she fell pregnant again with my mother, and she came to Scotland. And there was a group of nurses in a hospital in Scotland called the Vale of Leven, who would protect these girls as best they could. They'd give them, try and give them a false identity or whatever, and try and get any children registered as British citizens if they could get away with it. Some of them were caught,
Yeah.
arrested, and imprisoned. Terrible things happened to these nurses, but they did what they could. So, but eventually, my gran went back to Ireland, and my mum was about 7 or 8 years old. That's how long it took before she felt it was safe for her to go back. And then my mum fell pregnant with my older sister. She was born in Scotland. My mum, because of the Imelda laws, I don't know if anybody, the Imelda laws is
Yeah.
an acronym. It's the England mandated as legal destination for abortion,
Yeah.
where you were allowed to leave the country to get an abortion, but many of the girls didn't go back. They didn't get an abortion. They stayed in Liverpool or Glasgow or London. Those were the main places that they went to.
I've actually met the people. I've actually met some of the people who set up Speaking for Imelda.
Oh, right. Well, so I was born in Donegal. My mother wasn't married at the time, and I was brought to Scotland when I was a few days old. And the nurses there registered me as a British citizen. I was 1971. I was one of the last. I was lucky, But
Yeah.
it was a few years. It's a few years ago now. It's about 25 years ago now. My grandfather died, and it was all the family came to the wake who was left alive and so. And mum, I think it was my mum, made a comment. She said, "Oh, it's good to have all the family here." And her great aunt, I think, or her aunt, my great aunt, said, "Not all your family, because your brother's not here."
Jeez.
And said, "No, my brother is here." Said, "No, your other brother, the brother you never met." And said, "Well, what one?" He said, "The brother." We didn't know this, and we didn't find this out until much later. The first child, my grand's first child, who was taken from her, was taken into one of the nunneries, or one of the homes run by the nuns, and disappeared. Right, and we knew nothing about this, so my mum and my dad and the family put together, and they spent about 20 some years trying to discover what happened to this child.
Yeah.
And of course, you come up against the might of the Catholic Church, and they're not telling you anything.
Of course not.
You can't, And there was a huge argument in the family because you can't. Like, how dare you question the church? With with priests coming round to the house threatening my family. My mother was excommunicated from the Catholic Church. It was a terrible
Jesus.
time. We had lawyers coming in the door every day,
Yeah.
you know. But they just went on and on. My mum eventually hired a private detective and he spent years and years and years and eventually discovered that, well, it was quite by accident. A priest had been arrested in South America. Guess why? You know, and they
Do I
had the
even need
same.
to?
No, he had the same name. Right now, my family name isn't that common. Even in Ireland, it's not that common. And so he investigated it, and he discovered that this priest, the rapist, had been moved around 4 or 5
Yep.
times because of that, and he had taken the name. They had taken the identity of my mum's brother to hide him
Jesus
from the authorities,
Christ.
and he'd been moved around by the Catholic Church at least 5 times all around the world. And when these children who went to these homes were either starved to death or left to die from disease or murdered or whatever happened to them, they kept the birth certificates so they could use them to give
Yeah.
priests new identities. So we
Jesus.
discovered that for 25 years, this rapist had been using my mum's dead brother's identity to carry on with, and he worked in a fucking orphanage. They put him in charge of an orphanage in South America, even though he had a list of accusations against him. But every time they would simply change his name, destroy the old identity, and you'd give him a new name. They'd call him John McGee. And you searched up John McGee, and there was nothing there because John McGee didn't exist. John McGee died in 1969.
Fucking hell.
And it was a pure coincidence that he was caught. And then when we found, that's when things got really ugly. You know,
Mhm.
a lot of things came out then that I'm not sure I want to talk about right now. So
That's okay. That's okay. Um,
mhm.
it was a well-known practice, and it came out in the reports in Boston how they would actually use these names and give them to well-known abusers. They would use them for 3 to 4 cycles, and if they were moved after 3 or 4 times, they would be given a whole new identity, as you said. To find that someone in your family had been so disrespected, that I can't imagine how hard that must have been.
Well,
And what's more, because Ireland has such fucked up laws. You're not entitled automatically to your history, and this is why so much of the backlash came in the last couple of months, in particular, that they were going to seal, like the Bon Secure nuns, the Bespera nuns. They all have in-depth records of who was born and when, who died and when. They don't have the burial sites, but they have all the records. And who they went to as well, some of them. Some homes do. The ones controlled by the councils have who picked up the child, whether they were domestic or foreign, for instance. And so to get those records is, depending on where you go, is easy. But the obstruction of justice and the refusal of the Irish state to take that information and give it to the families. Instead, what they were doing was they were taking some information and sealing the entire records for 30 years.
This is one of the obstacles we came up against. Once we discovered what had happened and why this man had my uncle's name, my dead uncle's name, we managed to track down where he'd been sent to. Now, I can't remember. I don't even know if I know, let alone remember the name of the home he'd been sent to. But my parents went over with a couple of her brothers and sister, and they confronted the man who'd ran the place at the time, and he sat there and bald-faced lied to them. You
Jesus
know, it
Christ.
was like, oh no, that's not him. Your brother was sent to, the lies you tell a kid when the puppy dies. You know, or he went to this rich family with a huge big farm and blah 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 blah. And a few years later, that was one of the churches where one of the homes that was church run, where they found the corpses of the children.
Yeah.
And that man was in charge of the home at the
You
time. And he's a murderer. Sat in front of my mother and told her that her brother had moved to like America or Canada, knowing perfectly well that his corpse was buried in a mass grave in the churchyard. And he looked her right in the eye.
that
And
is cruel.
it's horrifying, absolutely horrifying.
Yeah. That is cruel. Beyond
So,
anything else, that is cruel.
but nothing happened to him. Absolutely, there was no consequences. He was protected by the Vatican. He was protected by the local council. He was protected by his local church groups. And eventually he died before he could be brought to justice. Like most of them have now, or were told have died, but they've been given a new identity and have simply been moved somewhere else.
So what's your take on this whole bullshit of we just need to move forward in unity and essentially allow healing to take place when there's been no accountability, when there's been no, as you said, no consequences? Most of the families are still huge, left with huge questions. I mean, your family got answers. It was not nearly one as easy as it should have been. It was not nearly as satisfactory as it should have been, especially with your loved one's name being used to protect an abuser. What is your response when you hear commentators, politicians, the likes saying, well, it's everybody's fault. We can't do anything about it now, so let's just move forward.
Well, I would ask anybody who would think that was like, yeah, maybe we should move on. Would you forgive your abuser because it was the best for them? If you had been abused physically, emotionally, and sexually by priests, the people you trust, men of God, and then 20, 30 years later, somebody comes and says, just forget it, just move on, it's for the best. Absolutely not. I will never forgive, and I will never I can't forget. That was my parents' experience. My own experience is very different to that. I don't.
Yeah.
This is. I mean, this is going to get grim, But I went to a Catholic church in the west of Scotland, a Catholic school, sorry, in the west of Scotland, because we came here because my mum thought we'd be safe, but they followed us. The same priests, the same clergy, the same nuns, they followed us here, assumed different names, and their past was buried. And I went to a Catholic school, and my younger brother was an altar boy. For anybody that doesn't know what an altar boy is, he's a kind of assistant to the priest,
Yeah,
and
I was an altar girl. I was an altar girl at one stage.
Well, the silver cross then,
Yeah.
the little silver cross. My brother was an altar boy, and my brother was always full of life. He was a young boy, full of joy and happiness, and he was so pleased to be chosen for an altar boy. It was a great
Yeah.
honour to be chosen as an altar boy. But one day things changed. He wasn't the same anymore. He was quiet. He was withdrawn. And there was again a huge big fight in the family about what had happened. He wouldn't talk about it, and so on and so on. Everybody knew, but you never spoke
Yeah.
about it. You didn't dare speak about it. You absolutely did not dare. And so I don't know if you did this where you were, where the priest would come and do confessions in the school rather than in the
Yep.
church, right?
Yep.
They take you
They
into
did that
like a
here too.
room on your own, right? And I remember the man, he would sit with his hands on your thighs as you close your eyes and you'd make your confession. And I said, have you got anything to confess? And I said, no, I was only 10, 11 years old at the time. What had I done? And I remember asking him, do priests go to confession? And he said, yes, we do. And I said, did you confess what you did to my brother?
Oh.
Oh. Now, the next thing I know, I'm on the floor because he's either slapped or punched me across the face,
Yeah.
knocked me to the ground. I remember my ear was bleeding and my mouth was bleeding, and he picked me up by the hair, and he was, he was furious, like red face, foaming at the mouth, and he snarled into my face, he said, don't you ever fucking question me again, you little shit. And he
Yep.
dragged me by the hair and he threw me into a cupboard, which was a storage cupboard in the classroom.
Fucking hell.
And the next person came in, and the teacher asked where I was, and he said, oh, he got a little upset by all this, it's quite overwhelming. I'm just leaving him in there until he calms down. And I was in there for maybe half an hour or so. And then the teacher came in. I was a little boy, I was crying, there was tears everywhere, And I remember the teacher being angry at me because I had embarrassed the class, I'd embarrassed the school, by acting out, and she apologised and kissed the hand of a fucking rapist, a man who had just sexually abused me and then physically assaulted me right there in the school, and she kissed his hand and apologised for my behaviour.
Yeah.
And then, but there's nothing we could do. Nothing. We're up against the might of the Catholic Church. The teachers in my school weren't chosen for their ability as teachers. They were chosen for their loyalty to the church.
Very true. First of all, thank you for having the strength to talk about it. I often talk about my own experiences sometimes just with trauma because I don't like the idea of anyone else telling my story for me. So there is something powerful about being able to tell your own story. So I thank you for that, first of all. I know exactly what you're talking about. You did not question the church. You didn't. You were given the honor. You didn't question it. You were chosen. You were special. And you were made to feel special.
Yeah.
To go against that, even like for us, again, I went to a public school, by the way. Public schools, if you don't know, in Ireland, most of which are controlled, even now, by the Catholic Church because they sit on the board of directors and the PTAs, and they determine everything in our school system. And it's incredible. Like they used to come in, the nuns used to come in to my school, a public school, and get us ready. We'd have religion class. Instead of it being 40 minutes, it was an hour and a half. We'd be getting ready for communion. We'd be doing confession. We'd be learning about religion, but not world religions. It was literally Catholic indoctrination.
That was pretty much, nothing went down in my local authority. Nothing happened unless the Catholic Church said so. You couldn't make a decision, and I mean, I don't know if it's still the same where you are, but you can't pass a law without there being a member of the Catholic Church on the board that passes that law.
Mm-hmm.
That happened in Scotland for so long, and we've become so used to it that there was these unelected clergy would decide what the laws were, and you couldn't fight them because you couldn't unelect them. There was literally nothing you could do. And when
Well,
it went too
that
far, they simply just
yeah,
moved them and brought somebody else in. So you had to
yeah.
start all over again.
That's part of the problem, isn't it? And it's that feeling of helplessness. For me, I know for a lot of the Magdalens that I've spoken to, and I've been in touch with the survivor groups, getting the acknowledgement from the Parliament was a big deal. Yes, it was rhetoric. Yes, they haven't had the full redress scheme yet, but it was acknowledgement. And looking at that clip that I just showed in the Ryan report, it was the fact that during the Ryan report and the Murphy report, they brought bishops over from Rome, from the Vatican, to tell these people that they were lying, to listen to their stories, and as you said, look them in the face and tell them they were lying.
Well, when I tried to talk about what had happened as a child, I was called a liar. I was actually given the belt for telling lies.
Yeah.
I was punished. I don't know if people who don't know the belt is. It's a leather strap you get across your hands. You have to hold your hands out, and the teacher whips you with essentially a leather belt. So I learned very quickly that to tell the truth about what had happened meant punishment, further punishment from the people who were supposed to protect you.
Yeah.
So at one
And that's
hand,
it.
it had the church was abusing you, and they told the teachers, and they further abused you for daring to tell lies about the church.
It's such a warped mentality to be teaching children.
From like the Ryan report and what's happened with the mother and baby homes is a start, but it hasn't. There's no redress for the people in Scotland at all. There's a whole other generation where these priests followed us here, and the same things went not to the same extent. But I've got one of my best friends had his hands put in a vice and crushed for absolutely no reason whatsoever by a sadist who got a sexual thrill from torturing children. My PE teacher at school was actually a disgraced and defrocked priest who they had retrained and then sent to a fucking school. Can you imagine the mentality that it takes to take a known child rapist and put them in charge of a fucking high school football team?
It's beggars
You know,
belief.
it was the way we were treated was so as if we didn't matter. We
Yeah.
were of absolutely no consequence whatsoever. I said, I was born in Donegal on the floor of a farmhouse kitchen, which sounds really romantic until you realise that it's because the local authority didn't want to waste the money sending an ambulance because they simply didn't care if we lived or died. When I came here, we were treated badly by the local authority and the police and so on. There was the other side, you know. But it wasn't until
Yep.
many years later that we found out we were the children that weren't supposed to survive. We were brought here to be aborted, and no one wanted us.
Irish DC 95 raises a very, very good point. The Ryan report went into detail about how boys would make the leather straps that you're talking about, Tusk, in the workshops before being beaten with them later. Sometimes bits of metal was added to give a bit of weight to the straps.
There was one teacher in particular, a Mr. Kelly, his belt had a lead core. So it was about 4 or 5 times heavier than the normal leather belt, and it would split your palm. It would split it clean in two. if you got you just right, but you were told you deserved it.
Yeah, and you were made to believe you were made to believe you deserved it so much that you almost appreciated it when it came, kind of thing, that you expected it. You knew you were bad, and this is the
Oh yeah,
mentality that kind
yeah.
of
I mean,
sparked off that
I
you
have.
as a functioning adult, it's very hard as a functioning adult to then trust another human being like you're supposed to, because when you're raised with this such a warped sense of morality and understanding about how other people relate to you, it's very, very hard then to have a functioning relationship after that.
Well, yeah, it took me a long, long time before I could trust another adult. All through my teens, into my 20s, and so on, because my experience was one of um, it was literally a painful experience. You couldn't ever open up. You couldn't tell the truth. You kept your whatever you were feeling hidden because you didn't know if what you were about to say about how you were feeling would somebody would take offence to. They'd say, how dare you say that about whoever it is, even friends. Say
Yeah.
like one of my friends, I wasn't happy with the way he was behaving. I was afraid to say to my other friends, look, I'm not, this is what he said, in case they turned on me. Because that was my experience through my entire childhood. That you didn't speak out. You couldn't. Oh.
Thank you for being here, by the way. I mean, it's hard to discuss such personal things.
Well,
Believe me, I
yeah. It's today, when I saw that this is what you wanted to talk about today. I went, oh, okay. This needs spoke. This needs said. People need to know. You know. And I went
yeah,
out
and
for a walk.
it's
And I walked around for a couple of hours. And just a lot of memories came back. Things that I'd buried away.
it's hard. It's one of those things that I was questioning whether I wanted to do it or not. And I was talking to a friend the other day, um, just on WhatsApp. We haven't talked in a while, and she was one of the people who set up a group called Real Productive Health. In and around the time that I started speaking about my own experience of being raped, having an abortion, and everything else. And she was able to sit down with me, and we looked into a report that she and a friend had done into contraception, emergency contraception, or the morning after pill, as it's known. And she was able to explain to me why 3 Dublin pharmacists refused to give it to me. And it was for a thing called conscientious objection. I don't know if you've ever come across this.
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Yeah. So conscientious objection, for anyone that doesn't know, is when religious people like to say, this goes against my morals, so I'm not doing it. And so because of that, the pregnancy developed, and I ended up having to leave my own country for access to my healthcare. And I was talking to her today about just that thought. At one stage, what we went through in the last 10 years in this country would have seemed so impossible. In the last 10 years, and I do want to say this because I think it's important. In the last 10 years, Ireland has seen the deliverance of marriage equality for LGBT, and we have seen the removal of the blasphemy law, which makes it illegal to blaspheme in public spheres. We have seen the complete reversal and removal of the Eighth Amendment, which was the constitutional ban on abortion. Um, these were really important fundamental issues for the Catholic Church here in Ireland, as well as seeing the move for Magdalene Laundries to be accepted, their testimony to be accepted and understood and spoken about, the mother and baby homes being out in the open, talking about it, the industrial schools, all of this has only happened in the last 10 or 15 years in this country, in the last 20 years in Ireland, that we are actually seeing, for the most conservative country that we're seeing a huge breakthrough and a breakdown of the church power in this country. Now, they're trying to claw a bit of that back. They're not going to, because we're going to refuse it and we're going to fight it. Do you think there is any way, because I know a good few of them that is in the group for the mother and baby home survivors, do you think there's any way of supporting the people like your family who have suffered at the hands of the same people that have been moved around? Or what do you think should be done or be seen to be done?
An acknowledgement. Simple as, just simply want an acknowledgement of what they did. Because, I mean, when you look back at the historical, I hate the word historical because it makes it sound like it's in the past. But
It's
over
not. It's still going on.
the last 50 years, especially, because that's my experience, is that it sounds like you're making it up. Because it's so nightmarish and it's so well planned and executed that it doesn't sound real. People simply don't believe it, you know. But then they find, like the Twam home, where there's dozens upon dozens of infant corpses, and you know. But there's a lot of people, especially amongst my friend group and peer group, who won't talk about this at all.
Yeah.
Because they're ashamed.
The shame and the stigma, is what keeps, and this like 20 years ago, you in this country, you could not even say the word abortion. It was, if you were going to talk about it, it was termination. You talked about the terminations. And I mean, if you had told me 20 years ago that we would have legalized abortion in Ireland in 20 years,
Yeah, I would not
I would have, you know,
at all.
but the way in which we broke that, like, as I said, like what you seen on the clip that I showed, was that it got so desperate. The situation got so desperate. Like for us, with the abortion situation, it took a 31-year-old dentist from India dying in a Galway hospital for us to be able to talk about abortion. It took the death of Savita Halappanavar to break the church and to break the stigma and the mentality around silence in this country. It took that woman dying in order for us to have that conversation. It took, I don't even know what actually sparked the Magdalene Laundry report, but it took the likes of the Magdalene Sisters, the movie coming out. It took the likes of the Ryan report and people stepping up and saying, you know what? Yeah, I'm afraid. Yeah, I'm hurt. Yes, it's tough, but I won't be silenced anymore. And that is a huge step.
Sorry.
Sorry, it's a huge step that has to be taken, but it's so hard to get that first foot on the rung of the ladder.
This is where this is all focused, and I mean, the focus is and should be on what happened in Ireland, but it wasn't just Ireland. And what I want is an acknowledgement from the church what they did. So in a safe space for people to come out and talk about it, right? Because this is like, I mean, were abused as children by men. That made you homosexual, and that
Oh,
was
for
something
fuck's
to be
sake.
ashamed of. If I'd come out at school, especially where I grew up, and there was a boy at my school who came out as gay, and they kicked him to death in the playground.
Jesus.
Right? You couldn't. I mean,
The toxicity is
I
is
thought it
is
was horrifying. But this was part. This was part of it. This was part of the system. You know, you didn't dare speak about it because that made you gay. You know, you get
yeah.
touched by a priest, you're a homo. You know, and the stigma of that was probably worse. But what I'd like personally is a safe space where I can sit, not necessarily with the people involved,
No, because
but
that's not
because
safe.
no, it's not safe. I mean, I remember being given detention for being rude to the priest and put in a room with that fucking priest, a man who had abused me, and now I was put into his care. You know, I
Christ.
want an acknowledgement that they lied to our faces, and this was a deliberate act. It wasn't as though this was one or two rogue priests or one or
No,
two
this is
rogue nuns. This was systemic.
yeah,
This was deliberate.
absolutely.
It was organised, and it was pleasurable for them. That's what gets me the most. They talk about
And
it as though they're the victims of these terrible
yeah,
urges
and
that they couldn't control. Yeah, but they
it's
took them out on us, children. They beat us. They abused us. Now, I don't. The people in the chat don't know about the Silver Cross. There was a thing if you were part of like the church, like an altar boy or I don't know what the female equivalent was. I don't think it was
altar
altar
girl.
girl. Altar girl.
No,
Right.
we were
If you were,
altar Sarah.
yeah, if you were a favourite of the priest, you'd done well. You know, they would give you a little silver cross, and that was something, you know, to have. Like, oh, you're so like the priest liked you so much, he'd given you this present of a silver cross. But we found out many years later that the silver cross was actually a code for other priests that this child was receptive, had been groomed already.
Yeah,
And the teachers would be so pleased if someone in the class got their little silver cross and didn't know
it
that they
was like
were being raped over and over and over again.
yeah,
I want an acknowledgement of that. You
and
know?
that crossed boundaries. That wasn't just in one country. That was everywhere.
That was everywhere. Yeah, it happened in America, it happened in Ireland, Scotland, England, it happened in South America, but everywhere. That was the code. A little silver cross. They fucking used, pardon my language, Keel, I'm sorry, I'm swearing a lot in
By
the chat.
all means, I don't censor anyone here.
They used the symbol of the church to mark who was receptive to their sexual advances. And we were supposed to be proud of it. We were so pleased we got our little fucking silver cross.
Yeah, never again says the real paedophile ring, and it really is. It really is.
The Catholic
But
Church is the biggest and most organised criminal organisation in the world.
completely agree because this isn't just a paedophile ring, although it is. This is beyond that, because depending on what you're into, it's not just the sexual abuse of children. It's the physical abuse. I remember watching Song for a Raggy Boy uh, for the first time, and that I'm not going to. If anyone hasn't seen Song for a Raggy Boy, there's a particular scene. Those who have seen it will know the scene that I'm responding to, or that I'm speaking about. And I remember one of my cousins says, "My dad went through that. He was lucky to survive." In a very casual way, you know, in a very, very casual way. And it's this desensitization um, to terror. The only other time that I've ever seen it was when I was in the States and I was going through an airport, I think it was, and just seeing this big soldier. Now, me and you, I don't know about you. Maybe you've seen it. But I'm from a country where we don't have soldiers in our airports, really. We don't have guards that are like, police that have weapons on them, except for a baton and maybe some mace. So to come into an airport and see, or even a shopping center, or what Americans would call a mall, and see soldiers and police officers with AK-47s and like this huge big gun strap, I shat myself.
Yeah,
You
it's a thing.
know, I was like,
The first time
why
we were,
is
yeah.
why
I
is
mean,
that guy there? You know, why does he have that big gun? And everyone was like, he just has a gun. You know, it's a normalized thing.
for me, that was
For
the
me,
first time I went to Israel and I saw armed soldiers in the shops walking the streets.
yes.
It was bizarre. It was bizarre.
Oh, Christ Almighty! Yes, going through the checkpoints in Israel between in Bethlehem into into Jerusalem. Christ
Yeah,
Almighty!
never
That
seen
that that
security
normalization.
in my life.
I walked into a center. I was with the UN over in Israel and Palestine, and we went into a little town called Belin. And Belin is in the northeast of Palestine in the West Bank, and we were going on this demonstration. We were supposed to kind of protect the people, the local people who did this protest every single week. And um, just before we headed out, uh, a child kind of hobbled in on crutches or on a stick. Well, it wasn't crutches; it was a stick, and his foot was gone. And the leader of the community center says to us, "Oh yes, this is my son. 3 months ago, he had to have surgery because you know the Israelis came across the wall. They opened the gate, came in, and shot his foot off. There were, and he made this joke. There wasn't rubber bullets that day, and I'm sitting there like, are you fucking
But
kidding
yeah,
me?
it's awful. I mean, uh, I
Like
have to
he,
admit, I was in Israel because I was part of a detachment of the British Army that was teaching the IDF in close quarter urban skirmishing to deal
yeah,
with what we classed as terrorists at the time. It was a PLO.
yeah,
Like for me, it was a job. It wasn't an ideological thing. It was simply part of my job.
of course.
Yeah. But yeah,
And we
that
were
that
there. We were actually there to try and protect the olive groves because settlers were actually attacking olive groves. So we were there as part of the UN um as witnesses, basically.
yeah, I'd have been on the other side, unfortunately.
But
But yeah,
it
that
was just
idea.
amazing. Again, yeah, the normalization of horror that he
Yeah,
actually thought
we
we'll
were
make a joke out.
one of the, I can't remember his name. One of the IDF, the Israeli Defence Force, for anybody who doesn't know. So he'd take us on. I can't remember the town we stayed in. It's a big barrack town. He said he'll take us on a tour, show us around. Well, oh, great, no problem. No, kind of mid-afternoon, and there was soldiers in cafes with their guns, hooked over their chairs. So normalised, this. But I remember we went up a little alleyway, and there was a cat, and it was sitting on the steps, and it was obviously a feral cat. We went, oh, a little cat, and he pulled his gun off and shot it, just out of hand,
Gee,
just bang. He shot it. He said, "Yeah, those cats are becoming a problem in the city," and that was that. And no one batted an eyelid. No one was shocked. It was just another gunshot mid-afternoon. And it was such a strange experience because we kept our firearms locked away, safe, unloaded, and so on. These guys walked around with them using them to shoot cats.
Yeah. I had a similar experience in Hebron. And if you don't know Hebron, Hebron is an area where it's half
Yeah.
and half.
Yeah, I know Hebron. Yeah.
Yeah, and so for anyone in the chat, that there's these sterilized areas, what they call sterile areas. So there's ABC in Palestine and Israel. You have ABC areas. A is where only Israelis can go. I think B is where only Palestinians can go, and C is where both. So in areas like Jerusalem, there are C areas, but there are also A and B areas. And in Hebron, they have what's known as sterile areas, where they're like buffer zones. And it's remarkable. It like that. You just see a soldier walking down the street, and his gun is on full display, and you're sitting there like, how can this be normal for people? Because again, I come from a culture where guns are not a big thing, where violence is not on display as such, or at least physical displays of violence is not really on display by authority.
Yeah, and everyone walks around flashing their semi-automatic rifle. You know,
And
I mean,
it's the same, but it's the same thing. Like, we don't have the physical manifestation, but we do have the mental manifestation of normalized violence, because for us it was internalized.
yeah,
Everything was internalized.
I think there was a problem, especially in Glasgow and obviously Belfast, which is a different kind of thing. There's some very angry, very violent young men who had internalized a lot of pain and a lot of anger, and their only outlet was in acts of extreme violence.
Exactly, yeah.
Because
And
you couldn't. There was no outlet. There was no way to talk about what was going on in your life. You couldn't do it. Toxic masculinity. Well, there was no such thing as toxic masculinity at the time. You were a man. You worked in the docks. You worked in the warehouses or whatever. And that was it. You liked boxing, birds, booze, and football. That was your life.
yep.
You know? But yeah, it's that normalization of swallow it down.
And that's why I think it's important to do streams like this, because we are reminding people that this is not normal. Locking women away and forcing and tearing their children away from them, forcing them to work. And just so people understand the difference between the Magdalene laundries and the mother and baby homes, first of all, was the clientele. Most of them would have been kind of wealthier people or have crossed wealthier people. So it would have been Taddy Bogle says religious violence. Nah, we take nothing to do with that kind of stuff in Glasgow.
On the hooks.
But yeah, so the laundries, and it's interesting what you said there about your gran having the second child and your mom having the second child, because in Tuam, where all of this started with the mother and baby homes, the reports, the county manager, this is going to make your stomach turn. But the county manager had this policy that women that went into the Tuam mother and baby homes, if they were brought back a second time, as in if they were still unmarried and they got pregnant again, they would be transferred from the mother and baby home to the local Magdalene laundry.
Yeah.
Her identity would be stripped. And this is the other thing about the report. There was horrendous abuse. Inhumane, by the way, was only used once in the entire report.
I think that's what made me angrier more than anything. The fact that they spoke about this in such clinical terms, as if we weren't human, as if what had happened when
It's whitewash.
a man, a priest or a nun has abused a child so badly that it's simply easier to kill them and
Yeah.
dispose of their body in a septic tank.
I think
Because
that that's what
no one
caused
cares.
outrage for a lot of people. It was the manner. And this is what annoys me actually about Irish society. It wasn't the fact that they institutionally murdered 800 children under the age of 3. They institutionally murdered them. Let's have no bones about it. Over 70 years, they institutionally murdered 800 children under the age of 3 years old. Um, but it wasn't that people got upset about. It was the fact that they weren't buried properly.
Yeah, it doesn't
Do
matter
you know what I
that
mean?
it doesn't matter that it was easier to kill us than to feed us and let us survive, while taking, let's be fucking clear on it, tax-free charitable donations and government grants that were supposed to look after us and feed us. They simply let us die. But what angered people most is that we weren't given a Christian burial.
Yeah. That
I'm saying we
amongst all the
because I
abuses,
survived. You know.
yeah.
A week
Which
later, I mean, my gran had her first child ripped from, as you say, ripped from her arms.
that is a violent act, and it should be called a violent act.
I've met people through my life, through various jobs I've had and partners who've worked in like mental health units for so on. There's a woman there who was in her 80s and she'd been in an asylum since she was 14 years old because she fell pregnant. And she'd been put in an asylum and she'd been there for 67 years. She'd no idea about the world. Never been on a train, never been in a car, except to go backwards and forwards to the hospital for treatment.
Yeah.
You know, she'd never handled cash, never had a partner. You know, it's just
I mean, that's what's scary about the laundries, because you could have been in there for literally your entire life.
yeah,
I'm trying to remember. There was something that I wanted to say there. Whereas the mother and baby homes, for the most part, not obviously not all instances, what they like us to believe. Because I have friends, I have a friend who was adopted out from a mother and baby home. But what they like to present, and this is what really hurt when I was reading it, and I pointed it out there when I started to read it out. They We haven't learned our lesson of blaming women, of not trusting women, of not believing women. We haven't learned it
no. It was
because
the language of they had failed to secure a future
that
for themselves.
hurts.
That's disgraceful.
That hurts beyond anything. As if women of that time were just silly little girls who didn't understand, and they just didn't do enough to convince someone. Um, and again, it's using sexuality and using parenthood as a punishment. And not only are we going to punish you by making you have this baby, you're also not going to keep it at the end of it, whether you like to or not. And this is what annoys me. Throughout the report, they talk about these experiences and this helplessness that women didn't have a voice, didn't have a say on what was done with their babies. They were going through, and yes, it's traumatic, even compounded by the trauma of not having a say over the baby, you know. And yet they take responsibility away from the people who inflicted that horror and throw it back at women again by saying, but there's no evidence to suggest that they did anything wrong. Oh, this was
Yeah,
inhumane, but there's no evidence. We're just going on your word. And it's as if, uh, your powerful story that you told to us earlier on, that I'm so grateful for, it's as if, well, why should I believe you? I believe you on one hand, but why should I actually act on what you've just said?
Yeah,
And it's that condescension that really, really hurts.
that was what angered my family the most. It was the blasé attitude of, well, it happened so long ago. What do you expect me to do?
Yeah,
I expect you to
as
do
if
your fucking job.
it's still, if it's as if it's not still happening in some way, shape, or form in
Yeah.
some parts of the world.
Oh,
There are some parts of the world where, because of religious leaders, there are women being jailed for miscarriages because they can't prove that they haven't had an abortion.
yeah. There was a, I mean,
It's still happening.
there was a girl at my school. She got pregnant around 14, 15 years old by a boy in the school. And the first person that was contacted was the priest, who
Yeah,
came and said, "We're taking your child. You can't look after it." No, she had no choice. No choice whatsoever. That is the way it was. You're a silly little girl. You've made a stupid mistake. We're taking that child from you, and she refused. Absolutely, point blank refused. But when we found out what the fate of that child would have most likely have been, it's stomach. As you say, it's stomach churning. You think that
there
someone's so close
was
to you, you know,
there
a girl
there
you grew up
was yeah, there was a report. There was a report of a woman in New Ross, in County Wexford, and she was telling the story of, she used to be sent. There was St. Aidan's, I think it was. She used to be sent into a corridor between the school, the local school, uh, and the mother and baby homes when these people would come. And when she came home and she was talking to someone years and years and years later, she was talking about it, and a woman came up to her, that overheard, and said, "Do you remember that girl that was sent into the catacombs when the inspectors would come?" Now, for years and years, the organization said that that never happened, that she was never in that home. Never. She never entered that home, according to the nuns who ran it and the Irish state. She was never there. Um, and she says to this girl, that was me. What do you mean, inspectors? Because they're telling me I was never there. And so they actually found out. Yeah, Stream Elements is an asshole, by the way. But they actually found out that inspectors would come from the local county council into these mother and baby homes. And remember, the county homes. Sorry, county homes were similar to mother and baby homes, but they would also host people who with disabilities, particularly of wealthy families who didn't want intellectual or physical disabilities to interrupt the family progress, and the standing in the community. So, like, my own nan told me about a story that when my mum was diagnosed with her disability, which I'm not going to go into, the local priest suggested that she put my mum in a home for her to work.
uh,
And it was the only time my nan told the priest to get the fuck out of her home.
yeah. This a thing that we haven't really touched on that we have now is that we're talking about these like babies between the age of 1 and 3. It wasn't just children. The mothers in these homes were brutalized too. These young mothers were physically tortured, starved, and beaten, and worse.
Yeah.
because no one cared what happened to them.
Well, the first thing that happened was they were given a home name. Their identity was ripped from them.
Yeah, they're
That was the
stripped from
first
them.
thing.
They were given a new name. Yeah.
And they were discouraged, again, in quotes, discouraged from telling anyone else their story in the home because, solidarity. But they didn't want to risk embarrassing their family anymore. That's what they were told.
That's what they were told.
So
Yeah, that's exactly
they
my
were
experience.
dehumanized.
If you tell what happened to you, imagine how your mum's going to feel. Imagine how your family will feel, the shame of that.
It's not even that. If you tell the girl across the way, across the hallway, and remember, some of these hallways had 80 people, 80 women and their children living in one room, in one huge room. So what would happen was, if you tell your one over there, when she gets out, when her baby is born and she gets out here, she's going to tell your community, because she knows who your community is. And it was just how they would dehumanize the women the mothers in these homes, but also make them paranoid about stigma, and make them paranoid about the women who were going through the exact same thing that they were going through,
Yeah.
and might actually lend some support and some love and some care. They got none of that. It was all ripped away from them alongside their identity.
That's kind of what I was saying before about there was no outlet, there was no way, no one you could talk to, no way to speak about this, because you didn't have an avenue where you knew it was safe. These girls, and they were mainly just young girls. They were in it, their peer group all had sharing the experience, but they were terrified of one another. And I can't imagine how could you live that way, where you couldn't trust the person next to you.
80% of women in these homes were under the age of 30.
Yeah.
80%. That's huge.
No. I mean, even now, I say it's only recently that I've kind of spoken about this and things to my own partner and everything what went on. It seems so outlandish that I think it's difficult to convey to people that haven't experienced or been through this just how organised and how deliberate this was.
And also how paranoid they make you.
Yeah, I'm still suffering from, Catholic guilt's a thing you never shake.
But it's not even that. It's and this is what you were saying about the acknowledgement and the importance of the acknowledgement. When I watched that clip of the Ryan report, the survivor of the Ryan report, basically what he is saying is exactly what you said. We want them to tell the truth. We can't move on with our lives. It's still affecting us, and it still will affect us until you tell the truth. Why can't they just tell the truth? If you watch that full clip,
I remember. I watched the whole thing. The man talks about being physically abused and more especially raped in front of the entire class of his peers, where the priest
and
had
then
a orgasm,
and then told he was lying.
Yeah. Now the way we spoke, there are a few of my friends and people I've met along the way. Not enough, but we talk about the spirit of reconciliation in South Africa.
Yeah.
Where you could sit down with the man who tortured you and abused you, your jailer, face to face. And apparently that was very cathartic, and it did help the country heal as a whole. Maybe not individuals, but they won't do it. They hide these people from us. They won't do it, and that's the worst thing, I think. is the idea that they still don't acknowledge it, that we're essentially lying. We're
Yeah. And I
liars.
mean, the balls, the fucking balls of the bond securers saying you won't find a single bone. 800 bodies of infants were there. You know, it's the balls of it. And then to go in for the fucking the maternity hospital 2 years later. They're vying for the
Yeah,
national
yeah.
maternity hospitals.
It's like I said before. There was a defrocked priest who was retrained and put in charge of my school's physical education department. The man was a rapist, a child rapist, and they went, "Oh yeah, give him the job. He's good enough. He's got the qualifications."
I mean, I for me, right? I would argue till I can't argue anymore for religious freedom and the freedom to believe what you believe. Someone said in the chat is earlier on that religion and faith. I think faith more than religion. Faith is personal. Religion is not. And the reason why I say religion is not is religion is the organized affirmation of faith, and religion is organized. It's not a it's a social thing. It is a political thing, but it's a social thing. And it's the need to associate with a tribe that believes the same things. And let's be honest, it is tribalism, it is fucking parochialism. And the issue that I have is I would fight tooth and nail for people to believe whatever the fuck they want to believe and to explore what they believe. But what's happened is, even now, for instance, the biggest landowners in Ireland is the Catholic Church. Even now. These religious institutions use the idea of religious freedoms and the freedom to assemble and the freedom to practice religion. They use and abuse to get away with criminal activity. And you're not going to see any acknowledgement of criminal activity until the books are opened. Until we see the extent of it. Until we have governments, not just in Ireland, not just in Scotland and the UK, but across the world, that's able to take a stand, a realistic stand, and open the books and take back the power. That's when you will see the ability for us to have that conversation that you're talking about. Because if the law is protecting them, and not only protecting them, allowing them to continue business as normal, we're not going to see a fundamental shift in the dynamics of the institution, because they don't have to change because they're being let away with it.
The only thing that's changed is the location.
Yeah.
They're still doing this in Africa, and African nations are still doing this in South America. And the developing nations, they've simply moved the base of their operations. They have not changed at all. And whenever you try, as we tried for 2 decades and more, the records are in the Vatican, and you cannot subpoena the Vatican.
No, because it believes it's its own fucking state.
Yep, it's a state. You can't subpoena the state. It's too powerful. I mean, they tried over and over again to bankrupt us, and they would have done if we hadn't become. I mean, it's one of the reasons I became a lawyer.
Yeah.
They tried to bankrupt us. They obfuscated. We would get 30 letters a day from lawyers at one point. It became absurd, and you have to be, they say, we've set up an interview with Bishop so and Monsignor or whoever it was. but it was 200 miles away at 7 o'clock the following morning. You know, it was absurd. It was like, it was Kafkaesque. You know.
Yeah.
And,
Um. I'm going to close the stream down in a few minutes. This has been incredible, and I sincerely want to thank you for coming on.
well, thanks for having me. It's not often I get somewhere I can talk about these things without people going, "Oh, but come on."
No, we need to have these discussions, and people need to hear that side of things, your side, and believe it, because it's so, as you said, it's so abstract, it's so mental. If you've never been through it before, it's hard to understand the level, as you said, of sophistication. But I do want to leave on a positive note, or try to anyway, because what's remarkable is the level of resilience, and this is why I find sociology so fascinating and people so fascinating. Um, the level of resilience that we're capable of is incredible. I've seen it with my own life. I've seen it in my political life of being part of these groups and fighting for justice and seeing things change. Again, if you had told me 30 years ago, well, I'm 33 in 2 months. But if you told me 20 years ago that this would all be out in the open and we'd be talking about it at all, first of all, we'd have the ability to talk nation to nation. We'd have the ability to talk about extremely sensitive things in such a powerful way that, although it's hard to talk about, there is some healing and some power in telling your own story and having the platform to do it. I love the fact that we do have the likes of Zoom, the likes of StreamYard, the likes of YouTube, that we're able to have these conversations. And part of the problem for Ireland had been that we were so isolated from the rest of the world, being in a little island, that we believed that this is how the entire world worked. That, rich Americans would just come in and buy up all your babies that you didn't want, or that society didn't want. We lived in such a bubble that having the ability to communicate with people outside of our own little group has shown solidarity on levels that we wouldn't be able to experience in our own little communities. And hopefully the report on the Magdalen laundry that we seen a few years ago, the report on the mother and baby homes, will be that stepping stone that other nations need to receive acknowledgement too. We've received it from the state. We're not going to receive it. I don't believe we're going to receive it from the religious orders, because they're let away with too much. They have too much power, as you say. But bit by bit, when you chisel away, people believed that they'd never see the fall of the Berlin Wall. We believe we'll never see the end of the Catholic Church power over the world. I believe, because of what I've seen over the last few years, that although it might not be possible in my lifetime, I believe it's possible.
Yeah, all things pass. It won't happen in our lifetime. I don't see the Catholic Church losing its grip on power, political and otherwise, for another 100 years. It's still far too powerful. But one day, I'll drink to one day.
Absolutely, absolutely. We stand on the shoulders of the giants and pave the way for the next generation. And I think that was a quote from a friend of mine, Alva Smith, during the Repeal the Eighth Amendment campaign. That's what she would say. We're standing on the shoulders
Yeah.
of giants, the people that came before us, that paved the way for us to have this conversation, and we are paving the way for the next generation to continue the story and continue the conversation.
Well, to end on an old Irish proverb, we live in the shelter of one another, and it's
Absolutely.
only by communicating and through solidarity that we can affect real change.
And
That's
on that note, stick around because I do want to have a little chat with you afterwards. But on
okay.
that note, I'm going to end it. So thank you everybody for coming. Tusk, I cannot thank you enough for giving us your experience. I can't thank you enough because
Thank you
it
again for
needs
this
to be heard.
opportunity to speak.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. So guys, I will talk to you on Sunday on Steam a Couple Reasons channel. Please do subscribe to him so you can see that stream. Bye everybody.